Hello everybody, welcome to this video. This is going to be about scripting fundamentals, and we're going to be looking primarily at JavaScript. Now obviously there is a 1 at the end of that title. That means, without meaning to sound too condescending, that I'm going to do more than one video about this, because it's quite a large topic and there's quite a lot of stuff that we need to be covering for this topic. Okay, so we're going to be talking primarily about JavaScript. It doesn't mean necessarily the only type of scripting language out there. In other videos that I have covered, obviously we've looked at HTML and CSS. Those aren't necessarily what I'm thinking of as scripting language in this case, because neither of those two are programming languages. So if we recall back to the beginning of all these videos, assuming that you've gone through some of them, you recall that HTML is the skeleton of the website, the structure of the website. The CSS is the way the website looks and the way it's laid out, whereas your JavaScript is more about its behaviors and things it can do. So learning outcomes was, like I said, it will kind of go on to more than one video, because otherwise it will probably turn into a really very, very long video, and I don't want that. I'd rather split it up into multiple different parts, make it more bite-sized really. So we're going to identify different scripting languages. We're going to identify and describe features of those different scripting languages. When I say that, I think I've worded that badly. Obviously, I'm going to be sticking with just JavaScript, so those will be the features, although you will find, once you know one programming language, that actually there are similarities between pretty much all of them. They're all very logic driven, and once you can program one of them, you'll be fine. For the other stuff, it won't take it anywhere near as long. I guess it's similar in that way to learning actual kind of real life languages. Also, I've been told, because I'm not very good at learning, unfortunately. Okay, so like I said, there's a range of different scripts that we can talk about, and I'm going to stick with JavaScript, client-side script. Now, what client-side means is that it executes on the machine the person viewing the website. So highly likely that when you're watching this video, you're going to be on a client-side machine. Okay, and just because you're a client-side machine for one website doesn't mean that you can't store your own websites on there and turn it into a server, but you will still be a client user for any other website. So don't think that you can't have the same machine being both a client and a server-side machine, but the vast majority of times you will be a client, and these codes will be executing on the end user's machine rather than on the server side. And ultimately, if you think about the types of things that we need the website to do, in terms of JavaScript is a very powerful programming language for what we need it to do, which will be a variety of different things. So, for example, it can create an image gallery, or it can interrogate things on the on the client machine to find out maybe what time of day it is, or there's lots and lots and lots of different stuff that we can look at. Now, this video, it doesn't actually look at how to start off doing that. It's more theory-based stuff. But obviously, in order to kind of really get your head around some of this stuff, I recommend you actually go out and try some of it. It isn't easy, and that's just why people get paid so much money at the end of the day. But you just got to keep at it, and keep going. And some days there will be a mental block, and other days you'll fly through some stuff. And that's life. You just need to get on with it, really. And obviously with server-side script, this is commonly using things like databases and things that, let's say if you're a big company, you're not going to be giving or sending your client a database of all of your stock. You've got so many different issues that are in play there, such as obviously the most basic one and most obvious one is going to be security, but also if you send a copy of your database to the end user, it's probably going to be massive, and it's probably going to be out of date 5 minutes later. So what's the point in doing that? It doesn't make any sense. And you'll use things like PHP and ASP, Perl, Python, all of those types of scripts to work with your websites, to work with programs that are held on the server side of the divide, I suppose you could say. Okay. PHP is and ASP are probably, well, I mean, but Python is also very well used. Perl less so these days. And I would, recommend going out and trying all of them. So PHP is open source, and you can download it as part of the WAMP suite. So Windows, Apache, MySQL, and Linux, and you can download that for free. ASP, I mean, these days you can get that for free as well. So I say you can get ASP for free. I mean, it's a language. I mean, it doesn't get given away. But in terms of being able to use it, you usually use something called Visual Studio is very common. And you can get that for free these days using Community Edition. And obviously Python, like I said, is extremely well used, especially in schools and so on. Despite it being a very old language, it's kind of curious. It's almost come back into fashion recently. But I will be concentrating on JavaScript because in terms of web development, it kind of forms the big three with your HTML and your CSS. It's very, very common. Pretty much every website these days. So I said it is the programming language of the web, but doesn't necessarily mean it's the only thing it's used for, because sometimes you may have some desktop and server programs which use JavaScript, but it is a extremely well used language, and probably one of the more accessible languages to start off with. If you've not learnt any languages before, it's a reasonable one to get to know. And realistically, if you want to be a career in web development, JavaScript is a must. Okay, there's so many different offshoots in web development these days in terms of languages, and very bespoke languages. And so bespoke means individual to maybe certain companies, so they have something designed for a specific purpose for them, but you can't budget for that when you're at school. Ultimately, we have to cover, and you need to cover languages that are the most common, okay, such as your JavaScript. There are extensions such as Node.js, Angular.js, get the word out in the end, jQuery, and so on. All of this stuff is extremely useful to learn, but ultimately JavaScript is the backbone for all of those, and that's where you would start off with all of that stuff, really. And a lot of the content management systems, so CMS is a phrase you'll hear quite frequently. We'll use a lot of those. So again, if you're interested in doing it, have a look at something like your WordPress, or it's not a CMS, but Bootstrap is also a very useful thing, which will use JavaScript. Both of those through a large amount of web sites these days. So why do we use it? So the biggest thing is going to be your dynamic content. Now HTML5 is going to be, when I say it's going to be, it is in circulation now, and that is designed to do a lot of the dynamic stuff for us, replacing things like Flash. So that may take some of the functionality from JavaScript, but we're still going to be able to do this with JavaScript. It's not going anywhere anytime soon. So like I said, that could be something like an image gallery. It could be something like making sure that when a user fills in a form on your website, that they've filled it in correctly. So making sure that an email address is in a specific format. So if you think about the way email addresses are laid out, you've got the first bit of it, the name, and then you've got the @ symbol, and then you've got wherever it's stored, so somewhere at gmail.com, and you're just making sure that using your JavaScript that it has all of those elements in there. Browser detection. So it's not just the type of browser you're using. The type of browser you're using isn't quite as important these days as what it would have been in the past. The current versions of Internet Explorer and Edge and so on are actually pretty stable. However, what you will find is obviously it will check for earlier versions of Internet Explorer, which did not generally perform as we would have wanted it to, and are on still some machines. But also it'll be things like browser size. So if you think about something like a Bootstrap, that has a number of different preset kind of sizes for its grid. So Bootstrap is basically a big grid, and depending on the size of the browsers, how it will lay out the grid. And obviously the smaller the browser, the fewer columns it will display on the page at any one time. Maybe it will flip into rows, depend. Execute events, so that could be something as basic as if you click a button, then a message pops up on the screen going, "Hello world." That's an event. It could be you performing a mouse over on something. It could be pretty straightforward. And cookie creation. So cookie is nothing to do with anything chocolate chip related. Well, maybe on a website that's about chocolate chips, who knows? But in this instance, it's like a little temporary memory store where it will store some data from when you've used the website previously. And the idea is that if that is stored on your machine, then the next time you come to use that website, it will be quicker. So it'll have some of your preferences stored in there, maybe, depends how it's designed. You could have a password stored in there, so that's why you're able just to load up a website and just go straight into it. There's obviously more than that. It's just a set of examples again. Like I said, it could be image gallery, or a quiz we've made in the past in JavaScript. So first thing we need to look at is syntax. So syntax refers to a set of rules, and that means that generally if you write a bit of code, that it should behave and do a certain thing whenever you look at it, irrespective of the browser you're using. So another word for syntax, I guess, could be protocols. Now, what we'll find is that there is a large amount of different things that we can talk about when we look at syntax for JavaScript, and this is why I wanted to split the video into more than one part, because otherwise it will just go on too long. And we'll start off ultimately with values. Now, values, you've got two different types of value, and the first one is your fixed value. So this is a value that will never change. Okay, this is a value that it may be a number, it may be text, or it's called text is a string, and this is, like I said, something that will never change. The user does not have the option to put something into the system that will change the value of this literal. Okay. However, where you have the power come in is something called a variable, really. So variables are a value which can change value. I can't think of a proper word then, but ultimately, you could potentially reassign a variable different values multiple times across a single session, whenever you need to do so. So what you would do is declare a variable, which you can see down the bottom here we've done with var x, and then you declared a variable. A variable is going to be called x, and you can at any point really change the value of x using the script, and it could be any number of different things. Ultimately, there's simply too many things in there to really kind of say, oh look, this is definitely what it could be. Now I'm just going to pop out of here for a minute, and I'm going to go into my browser. So a really good website is W3 Schools, okay, and you can see that I've stolen a couple of bits from them already, and you can see that as I scroll down here just how many things there are in here. W3 Schools, unlike HTML, all right, HTML is run by W3C, who are the company who make this website. JavaScript is not in that bracket, okay. So JavaScript was initially made by Mozilla, but you don't need to know the full ins and outs of it. But it is, you can see just how much stuff you have here that you have access to, and ultimately, you can say, "Oh, Mike, you need to cover X, Y, Z with us." But the thing is that there will come a time where you are going to need to problem solve, and the quicker you get into the habit of doing that, the better you're going to get at it. You're going to be looking for certain things to perform a certain action, and W3 Schools is a great place to start. Highly recommend it. And you could see, just going up here, there are different ways of declaring a variable. So you've got var x here, you've got var x y here. So you could have more than one variable there. You've got your literals in there. You've got operators, which I'll talk about on the next slide. So let's go back in here now. And on operators, you should all... I'm going to make a wild assumption that you guys are not 5 and 6 years old watching this. I'm going to make a wild assumption that you guys have come across operators before in day-to-day life. If you can hear that siren going off outside, that is nothing to do with me. Okay, so you've come across operators before: add, subtract, divide, multiply, equals, and there are more, such as greater than, less than. You can have the brackets to do specific things, and so on and so on. You do need to get your head around these, because obviously programming is a very logic driven activity, and operators are going to be used in there to work out things such as, if something meets a certain scenario, then do this, otherwise then do that. And there are thousands of these types of, they're expressions within any type of code. Okay, I say any type of code. Obviously, it depends on the size of the script that you have. But in any major type of website, you'll find hundreds of different expressions within it. So here you could find the use of a variable with a literal, or maybe a couple of literals here, or maybe you could have a string in there. This is something called a concatenation. So a concatenation is where you take two different, or more than two different things, and join them together to form a bigger version of whatever you had before. So you can see we have two words here, which are my name, so Michael Phillimore, and these could have been variables, they could have been literals. It doesn't really matter. But what we're basically doing is joining them here. These two basically are adding the space in the middle. If I didn't have these two speech marks here, there would not be a space there. Okay, so we do need to use those. Objects and properties we'll move on to now. So when we're talking about objects and properties, if we think about something in the real world, first of all, we've got some in the real world. An object is a thing, okay, and on the slides here I have the college as an example. You could have a car as an example. You could have you could have a computer as an example. You could have a piece of clothing as an example, okay. And they could individually be objects. They are likely to have properties, okay? So if we have college, the properties could include things like student, staff room, individual members of staff, computers, working hours maybe, wage, salary. If we talk about car, you could talk about doors, engine size. You could talk about make, model. But what you'll also find is that just because something is a property for something else doesn't mean that that can't individually be an object later on. Okay, so if you take, for example, college here could be an object, and it has student, staff room, staff, and computer. Actually, each one of these individually could in theory be an object, couldn't they? Certainly something like student and staff, if you take a student into consideration, you could have age, name, you could have qualifications, you could have gender, you could have any number of different things that could be their property. So, don't think that just because they're a property in one instance doesn't mean that they couldn't be the object in another one. So in JavaScript, and indeed a lot of programming, we can assign that object as a variable potentially called college. So we may think that the name of a college could change at some point. Or maybe you have more than one college, I don't know. And within that, you can assign values within that variable. So again, I'm going to just come out of this, and I'm going to go into objects, and I'm going to show you what W3 Schools says about this. So my mouse is really weird at scrolling down at the minute. So W3 Schools are suggesting the car, which I mentioned earlier. Funny that. And the properties here would be name, model, weight, color, just as examples. And you could potentially have methods coming off that. You just use these at different stages depending on what you want to do, really. These are basically kind of doing things rather than the properties, which are just kind of ways to maybe describe it, I suppose is a good way. And when you're putting code in, you could declare your variable here, so variable car, and then the car is a Fiat, but you obviously could have more than that, such as these are the values that I mentioned just now. So first of all, you declare your variable as a car, and then you put your values within. Obviously, you can have as many values there as you need to. Now you access it in one of two ways, which is object.name.property.name. So in this example, you would have car.type, okay, or you could have object name and then in square brackets the property name. So again, you could have car, and then in here you could have your type again. So what you could also have is your object could be stored as a method. So method is like an action which is stored as a property. So what we can therefore do is we can turn it into something which actually does something. So we can create like a function which collects the first name and surname of someone, and then we can create like a pop-up box on the screen that says good morning Mike, how are you, or whatever. So I've come to the end of this first half of this video. As you can see, we're 24 minutes into it, so it's still got a fair amount to cover. But thank you for watching this. I hope it has helped. As you can hear, my voice is getting quite croaky, so I think I might need to have a cup of tea before I do the next couple of videos. But thank you for watching again, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Bye bye.